Europe has always been a few weeks ahead of us in this global fight against COVID-19. Their cases surged before ours, and now some nations in the EU bloc are taking baby steps to get back to work. Maggie Rulli has this report.
You remember the images, healthcare workers struggling to keep the sick alive, the ICUs overflowing. Spain was hit harder than most nations, and for the first time in weeks since COVID-19 claimed over 18,000 lives, tonight, some relief. That nation's allowing some non-essential workers back on the job. Officials there trying to revive an economy on life support as they, like much of the world, are desperate to get back to normal. While some are eager to get a semblance of their old lives back.
I think that they did this at the right time. People are keeping the safe distance, and I think it is very good.
For others, it's a sense of unease.
The situation is a bit strange because you still see a few people on the streets. We are all confined, and I feel a bit strange.
In Madrid, those who venture out are handed face masks, courtesy of the government. A necessary precaution when the invisible enemy can strike again at any moment. In Barcelona, people are still on alert.
I've been a month in quarantine now. Everyone is taking a lot of measurements. The streets are still very empty, so you're able to take your distance from everyone. And I think it's a matter of taking the right precautions yourself.
Some of the businesses allowed to resume include those working in construction and manufacturing. Others working in shops and bars and public spaces must wait almost 2 more weeks while officials closely monitor the infection rate. For Austria, the back-to-work order is methodical. Small mom-and-pop shops are being permitted to reopen, while restaurants and larger stores have to hold out until May. We saw streets slowly starting to fill again as China loosened lockdown restrictions 2 weeks ago. And while those who lived in the original epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan were permitted to leave their homes, the fear of the unknown remained.
So it looks like things are fairly normal. It's kind of weird leaving the neighborhood. There's still like all these guards set up and stuff, and you have to scan a QR code to get out. I think they just kind of track you. I think we're just gonna play it cautious. Just go chill out at home. Maybe not leave the neighborhood for a while.
One thing is certain among those who have lived through this outbreak. No one wants a resurgence. But now that some European countries are starting to lift lockdowns, the inconsistencies within the EU bloc may be a new cause for concern. France and the UK just extended their restrictions until next month.
Everywhere in mainland France and in the overseas territories, the system is under strain and the epidemic is not yet under control.
Heads of state will have to reconcile how to deal with a plunging economy, perhaps the worst since the Great Depression, while families and communities grieve loved ones and an uncertain future.
And Maggie Rulli joins us now from London. And Maggie, while Spain and Austria attempt to reopen, Britain is still really in the thick of things like we are here in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly, Lindsay. Unfortunately, we are still seeing some high numbers that are very scary to be living through. More than 700 deaths again today in the UK. We saw more deaths, more hospitalizations over yesterday. And that's why, unlike some of our neighbors here in the UK, we're extending this lockdown. We're expected to extend it for weeks, although the exact length of that extension is still somewhat unknown. We're not alone, though. France is also extending their lockdown, which, Lindsay, leads to so many questions about what's going to happen here in Europe. When you have some countries, like you mentioned, Austria, Spain, Italy starting to tentatively loosen up some of these lockdowns. Then you have the UK and France getting stricter and tightening up. You know, it begs the question, what's the future going to look like? Is there going to be a new normal with borders open and trade freely and supply chains operating? Or is this the new normal that we're going to have to get used to? So even as some countries are opening up, there's still so many questions, Lindsay.
And Maggie, as you know, today the IMF released a dire warning saying the global economy could be plunging into its worst period since the 1930s, talking, of course, about when the Great Depression happened. How is the European bloc handling the crushing job losses?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, this whole thing started off as a medical crisis, but now it's quickly becoming an economical crisis as well. And here in the EU, we're seeing this firsthand. We know that millions are potentially going to be out of work, and the governments are trying to step up. We're seeing an unprecedented stimulus package here in the EU with more than 1 million companies across the continent that have signed on, saying they're going to try to avoid having to lay off their workers. But there was just still so much unknown. And just today, the UK came out telling people here, warning us to prepare for some tough times ahead financially, and even even, Lindsay, telling people that they're not going to be able to support every household, every business. So these kind of warnings are stark. They are hard to hear. But unfortunately, we know we're not alone. Nearly every country in the world is going to be dealing with this kind of economic crisis, Lindsay.
Maggie Rulli, thanks for reporting in again for us tonight.